sad evening to gather and talk about the corruption of American history education. But that's where we are, and we need to learn more about it in order to be effective in pushing back against it to the best of our abilities. That's kind of what we're here to do, learn about it, and then find some ways that each of us can take action.
Try to figure out how to, I don't know why it's mirroring. It's really bizarre.
Our speakers are many. We have 6 speakers, I think, so I'm going to move right through them. Shade it when we're done. Everyone has their unique story. I'm going to start with Mary Grabar, who's the author of
Yes, it is what it is. We're going to go with it.
Debunking 1619 Project, where we asked Jeffrey Shears to introduce Mary. I want to ask one of our members who's had personal experience in his family with Howard Zinn's writings. In fact, Howard Zinn has really had a very, I would say probably a devastating influence on his family. So Brad Beaton, would you come up and tell us about that, please?
Thank you very much, Bob. So last month, the Gwinnett County School District had a meeting where Steve Gasper usually attends there, right? Wasn't there at that one though. But I signed up to speak, and they allow you 3 minutes to speak. I'm gonna read you my 3-minute speech. I said, "Hi, I'm Brad Beaton, father of 6 Collins Hill High School graduates. At Collins Hill, most of my children were required to read a book of communist propaganda by Howard Zinn titled The People's History of the United States, and to pass a test on the book as if it were true when they came out of summer break." And by the way, the school district didn't buy the books. My kids came home and said, "Hey, Dad, we've got to read these books over the summer." And I bought several, and I got Howard Zinn was one of them. I didn't know at the time the poison that I was buying for the minds of my children. So they had to pass a test when they came back at the end of the summer. Over the decades, many hundreds of thousands of students have been required to read that communist propaganda in public schools. But now America is awakening to that betrayal. I propose, and this is what I propose to the school district, I propose that wherever the Zinn or the 1619 communist propaganda exists, those books should be accompanied by Dr. Mary Grabar's books, Debunking Howard Zinn, Exposing the Fake History that Turned a Generation Against America, and Debunking the 1619 Project, Exposing the Plan to Divide America. Dr. Grabar was a professor of history at Emory University, and other renowned historians and reviewers wrote of her book, Zinn was a lifelong communist, and Dr. Grabar exposes Zinn's treasonous life and refutes his dishonest, malignant, and ignorant work. And Zinn's book is a pseudo-history full of mistakes, lies, half-truths, and smears. Dr. Grabar wrote a 1-page summary of the 17 most outrageous lies in Zinn's book, and I have copies over there on the table. 1 page. I put them on 1 page, and I brought them to that night to the school board meeting. In my opinion, these lies form the basis for every critical approach that pits men against women, indigenous against newcomers, blacks against white, rich against poor, and so forth, which is the typical communist approach. Here are a few of Zinn's 17 lies that Dr. Grabar debunks. Lie: Christopher Columbus was a greedy Christian capitalist who committed genocide on the gentle Arawak Indians for gold. Lie: the founding fathers were money grubbers who set up a system of government to exploit the lower classes. Lie: the United States was and is the most racist place in the world because of capitalism. Lie: American women had the same status as slaves. Lie: communists were the only ones who cared about the civil rights for African Americans. Lie: Most African Americans wanted violent protest, approved of radicals like the Black Panthers, and liked the communists. A month ago, I asked Dr. Hunter, who is over history at Gwinnett Schools, and others to report the extent to which this critical race, critical class, critical gender, critical X theory is used in our taxpayer-funded public schools. Again, I propose that wherever the Zen or 1619 communist propaganda exists, those books should be accompanied by Dr. Grabar's books, Debunking Howard Zen, Exposing the Fake History That Turned a Generation Against America, and Debunking the 1619 Project, Exposing the Plan to Divide America. Thank you for your time and consideration. I hope to return and report on the progress of this proposal to debunk communist propaganda in our public schools. There you go.
I'm sorry, Mary, there's nothing more to say. I mean, you gave it all, really. I didn't know. Christian Study Institute over in Marietta for bringing Dr. Grabar to us. He had scheduled her to speak and had called and asked me if we could host it. So I said, absolutely, we'd love to. So Jeffrey, would you come up and introduce Dr. Mary Grabar?
Well, thank you very much, Bob, and what a privilege it is to be back with you all. I think I was here 4 or 5 months ago. Very much enjoyed the interaction with you all, and so very pleased. 2 years ago, we had scheduled Dr. Grabar to come and speak at an Areopagus forum. I believe that was about mid-March of 2020. And just the week before, of course, COVID erupted. And so it's taken us 2 years to coax her back to the Atlanta area, but we're very privileged to have her with us this evening. So I just wanted to say welcome to this Areopagus Forum, and I want to offer, of course, a special thanks to the Gwinnett GOP for hosting this event this evening. Over the past 19 years, our organization, the Areopagus, has sponsored more than 300 seminars and forums on topics related to Christian apologetics, history, science, significant books and films, and contemporary cultural issues. And so we are, again, very delighted to have Mary Grabar with us this evening. As you know, she brought her latest books. Some of my books are also available on the table over there. And I wanted to say that when I was a Ph.D. student in history, I had the unique opportunity of following up Howard Zen at Spelman College. That was a one-year appointment at Spelman College. Now, I didn't know who he was at the time, had no idea how much damage that he would subsequently do. And furthermore, I then taught for 20 years at Georgia State University. I remember that some of the American history professors at Georgia State would use Howard Zen's book, but back then it was really just kind of the far left-wing fringe of our history faculty. But now I understand it is the most common, most popular college history text for American history. And it's also, of course, there's, I believe, a version that's for high school students as well. So Mary Grabar earned her Ph.D. in English from the University of Georgia. That's somewhere around here, correct? I know it's in Georgia somewhere. And she taught at various universities, including Emory University. Since 2014, she's been a resident fellow at the Alexander Hamilton Institute for the Study of Western Civilization. That's located in Clinton, New York. In 2011, she filed paperwork for her nonprofit entitled the Dissent Prof Education Project, or dissidentprof.com. And that application was caught in the IRS targeting scheme under President Obama. So it took almost 2 years to obtain nonprofit status. And in late 2018, Dissent Prof was part of a class action lawsuit that successfully sued the government over viewpoint discrimination. People can read her blog and sign up for her newsletter at dissentprof.com. Her book Debunking Howard Zinn came out in 2019, and her second book, Debunking 1619 Project, in 2021. Mary was born, by the way, in Slovenia when it was still part of communist Yugoslavia, and she was brought to this country as a 2-year-old by her parents who escaped that communist regime. She grew up in Rochester, New York, and now lives in Clinton, New York. So it is a great honor and privilege to have Mary with us. And would you please welcome her with the
props. So I have props. So you can tell I taught college English because I always have an armload full of books and papers and notes. Back. I think, yeah, I want to go back to the first one. That's it. Yep. Okay, thanks. Well, it's great to be here. I'm glad you mentioned the Dissent Prof. One of my board members who helped me out a lot, Jane Robbins, is here, and I recognize people that I know from Georgia, Kathy Statham. I haven't seen her in years, and my good friends, Gwyneth and Mike, and so it kind of feels like I'm back home. So it's been 2 years, but instead of talking about one book, I have 2 books to talk about. So maybe that's the advantage, and 2 books to sell. So I'm going to be talking about both of them, and I'm expanding my topic to the general corruption of history education. And even though my PhD is in English, I feel like I am uniquely qualified to speak about that topic. And I will try to explain that in just a little while. So anyway, so our first slide is from the Twitter page of the creator of the 1619 Project. Her name is not Ida Bay Wells. Ida Bay Wells was actually a very brave and noble woman, an African-American woman who lived from about 1860 to 1930 and fought the real horrors of racism and discrimination, such as lynching and segregation. She assumes her mantle, and you can see her description. This is a reporter, the New York Times magazine covering race from 1619 to the present. That's a big beat to have. She described herself as the Beyonce of journalism, co-founder of the Ida B. Wells Society, smart and thuggish, and an Aries like myself. But that's the only similarity I claim with her. This woman here, this is supposed to be, I guess, a glamour shot, and she has updated it. And this is the person who wrote the 1619 Project, or actually created it, came up with the idea. She is the one who came up with this idea, and from the magazine, we have lessons in schools. So your kids are, if they're being taught the 1619 Project, they're being taught the writings of this woman. But when this came out, I had written about Howard Zinn, and I thought it couldn't have gotten any worse than Howard Zinn. And then I read the 1619 Project. And I think a lot of other people read it with the same sense of shock as I did. And basically this Twitter homepage, which has now been changed, tells us that we are going to replace the 4th of July, 1776, with August 20th, 1619. And I'll get back to the significance of the new date. But she has taken this down, and she has subsequently said she never intended to replace 1776. But we have the proof right here. So anyway, to think of this would be something that even the Communist Party would not have thought of. So to go back to the efforts of the Communist Party USA, which was first established in New York City in 1919, so we had a 100-year anniversary. We should have marked that, I think, in 2019. I mean, who would have thought that a project like this would be taught in schools that would teach American children that 1776 is not the date of the founding, that would upend our sense of history, our traditions, our 4th of July parades, our picnics, the date that Jefferson waited for before he died. As you know, he waited until the wee hours of July 4th, 1836, I believe it was. 26, okay. So he wanted to see that, and that's the last thing he asked about. So the communists could never have dreamed of this. Back in 1920 and 21, Lenin gave orders to the newly formed Communist Party, and his effort, he saw the weakness in American society, which was that there was discrimination against Blacks. And so he instructed the new Communist Party members to use, and I'm quoting, the Negroes as a strategically important element in communist activity. The party newspaper said, and this is a quotation, "The most important point in our agitation must be to fix responsibility for the Negro suffering where it rightly belongs, on the bourgeoisie and the capitalist imperialist system." Both the author of A People's History of the United States, which Brad had described and read my list of lies, that was his goal, and that is the goal of Nicole Hannah-Jones. So they are fulfilling the demands of Vladimir Lenin. Of course, we know that the original strategy of the communists, which was class warfare, revolution, the slogan "Black and White Unite and Fight," have the proletariat gather together and riot and commit violence, did not work. People wanted part of the American dream. So they adopted a new strategy, which was cultural Marxism. So they infiltrated the institutions, primarily educational institutions. And so they decided that our civilization would be undermined, would be chipped away at the base. So all the beliefs that we hold, the values that we hold, would be thrown into doubt. And this should start as a young an age as possible. And so the tenets of our civilization would be subjected to critical theory. And this was endless, relentless criticism and undermining of our values and our heritage. And of course, our heritage involves our history and our literary traditions. Howard Zinn, the author of this book, was a one-time member of the Communist Party USA from about 1948 to 1953. And he obtained his Ph.D. in history, and he did what the communists wanted him to do, which was to go into the universities and teach. And he did teach at Spelman College until he was fired after 7 years for insubordination. He radicalized the students, turned them against the administration, ostensibly was taking them on civil rights protests, but his real goal was to undermine the administration and radicalize them. And so he was subsequently fired. And there's a whole long sordid story in my book about that. If you want to learn the details about Howard Zinn's private life and what went into his firing, and there was also a morals charge and all that. So not a nice guy. He did not write a nice book, and he was not a nice guy. But what Howard Zinn did is he upheld the ideas of cultural Marxism. So in 1967, he contributed an essay to a volume called The Critical Spirit, Essays in Honor of Herbert Marcuse. And Herbert Marcuse was one of these people. He was a cultural Marxist, part of the Frankfurt School. These were the followers of Antonio Gramsci, who promoted this idea of going into the institutions. And in that essay, Howard Zinn wrote, and this was in 1967, is that the historian's role is to help us understand the present, right? The present. So we have, a promotion of presentism, but we think of history as the past, right? It's not the present. It doesn't concern itself with the present. And at that time in 1967, it concerned racism and the Vietnam War. Howard Zinn said historians should direct scholarship towards, quote, humane concerns, and historians should engage in social action. So in other words, this wasn't going to be disinterested scholarship where you look at all aspects and you try to be as fair as you can and be as neutral as you can. You needed to be a social justice activist. And the creator of the 1619 Project, Nicole Hannah-Jones, has the same philosophy. She has come out and said that repeatedly. Howard Zinn was a skillful propagandist. He knew what he was doing. He was capable of writing legitimate history, but he also knew how to persuade the young and the naive and to fool them with his history. And so his history often seems legitimate to non-historians. Real historians, just ignored this book. It wasn't really worth reviewing in any of the journals. So it took off though. Teachers started sneaking it in. They would photocopy pages from it, hand it out to students, take the photocopy pages back. I heard that strategy when I went to teachers' conferences and was just sitting there pretending I was a social studies teacher. And but now we have progressed to the place where they're mandating that students read it and that parents buy it. I mean, what a racket, right? Especially for someone who says he's a communist. But it's a communist history, and most people who read it, recognize that it's an anti-American ideological document. It's not real history, and they criticize it for it. But what I discovered when I went through it was that not only did he display an anti-American attitude, but he violated all the rules of history writing. So if you go to the American Historical Association, they have their code of ethics, what you should do and not do. Don't plagiarize, don't quote deceptively, don't leave out critical information, don't misrepresent someone's views. But Howard Zinn did all that, and just about on every page. And my book is intended to be a resource for people who want to refute Howard Zinn, sort of on this factual basis. But nonetheless, he is a skillful writer, and he's captured the imaginations of, young woke people and those who really don't know much about American history. And it has broken all publishing records. For a book of its type, sold over 3.5 million copies. So we also have the 1619 Project, which attempts to do a similar thing. It's not written by a professor, it's written by Nicole, or it's created by Nicole Hannah-Jones. This is her baby. She has gotten other writers to contribute to it, but she is not a historian. She is a reporter for the New York Times, focused on race and education. And basically, you probably all have seen this. This was a special issue of the New York Times magazine. It came out on August 18th, 2019. And it consisted simply of 10 essays. Now, this is supposed to upturn our history. Remember the oops. Backwards. Back to the first one. Yeah, go back to the first one. Yeah, okay. All right. So that's what it's attempting to do. I mean, no one has attempted to do this. I mean, no historian would, with a PhD with Pulitzer Prizes, would attempt to wipe out the 4th of July. But that's what this project does. Okay. And it does it through essays. These are pseudo-historical essays. They do have history in them. So Nicole Hannah-Jones writes the lead essay, which sort of provides the model for the others. And then you've got 17 literary works. And I've taught literature, and I've read some of this, what's called poetry and pieces of prose. And there are documents that have pictures and then have words blacked out. I don't know what genre that is. This is supposed to be poetry. I've taught poetry, drama, and fiction. But this is, so we're eliminating 1776 on the basis of literary works. Someone's asked to write poetry. Oh, well, this is being taught as history in grades K through 12, because this was adapted by a nonprofit called the Pulitzer Center, and the lessons were spread immediately after the magazine came out. There are short articles in a supplement. There are profiles of people from Howard Law School who are descendants of slaves, photographs. And so it's this whole mishmash, and it's going to upturn our whole sense of who we are, eliminate eventually this holiday. And, I think to myself, and I thought to myself when it came out, is this holiday going to be going the way of Columbus Day? Right? Look at what they've done to Columbus, and a lot of that is due to Howard Zinn. Howard Zinn did have a PhD. He knew what he was doing. Nicole Hannah-Jones, who was the creator of this and proposed it, does not have the PhD. She was radicalized in high school. Her mother is white, her father is black, but she was bused an hour each way to a white high school. And she has said this in interviews that as she rode the bus an hour each way beginning in 2nd grade, she saw the houses getting nicer and nicer the whiter the neighborhoods became. And that built up, this resentment in her. And so if we want to psychoanalyze her, I think we can see where some of this is coming from. Her Black Studies teacher introduced her to Lerone Bennett, who was an Ebony magazine writer. He wrote a book called Before the Mayflower, which is about the year 1619. He was not a historian, but he was a propagandist. He came up with the term Black Power, which Stokely Carmichael then used to incite riots. She cannot discern legitimate history from illegitimate history. She doesn't have the capability to do that. So this is who has written this transformational history. And I would like to say that there are other commemorations. So what is the significance of the year 1619? Anybody? Right. So it's we know that the first Africans came over on this ship that was it was captured. It was on its way to Veracruz, bringing slaves to work in the gold mines, and the English captain brought it to Jamestown. He needed provisions. These 20 or 30, we don't know how many Africans were traded for food. We don't know whether they were immediately enslaved. There was no legal code for slavery yet at the time. They could have been indentured servants. They did work next to the European indentures in the tobacco fields. We don't know what exact date, but she has selected August 20th. We know it's in the second half of August, according to Smith's journals, Captain Smith's journals. But not, so this was a commemoration. There were other commemorations in USA Today and Time Magazine. President Trump even commemorated this in a speech, but he was also focusing on the establishment of the House of Burgesses, the first representative government here in the colonies the month previously. So the reason there is this opposition to the 1619 project is because it's in schools and it is trying to upend our history. It's not simply commemorating something. We would have no problem with that. And for that very reason, there are laws against the teaching of it because it is false. And I've got a list of all the lies in the 1619 project, just like the list that I gave to Brad, and he read those to you. But I just have a few of them here. So Nicole Hannah-Jones's essay, she has alternated between calling it a narrative, an origin story, a work of journalism, a reframing, and historical truth. She has denied that she ever said she wanted to eliminate the 4th of July and replace it with 1619. But among some of the biggest, falsehoods that are promoted is the idea that Africans were kidnapped by Europeans. They were not. They were kidnapped by other Africans. The chiefs raided other villages, captured these Africans, then sold them to other Africans who were middlemen or Muslims, who brought them to the Europeans waiting on shore. So that is a big falsehood. It's promoted. I know she knows that this is a falsehood because I've called her on Twitter. Slavery in America was unlike anything that had ever existed before. We know that slavery has been around since time immemorial. We can't go farther back in history. Old Testament, it was in the ancient world, and it was in every single ethnic group, racial group, religious practice. She uses incendiary language like the plantations were forced labor camps, to evoke these images of Nazism and the gulags. She paints white people with a broad brush stroke. There's no distinction between white people. There are no abolitionists. There are no people who don't own slaves or profit from them. There are no people who work for civil rights. Instead, whites, lynched blacks, they burned them, they beat them, and this is being taught in elementary school and high school. Okay, it has since been expanded to a 600-page volume of pseudo history. It's got endnotes. The endnotes are to sources that are Marxist as well. Sometimes they go to web pages that don't have the information, but she's now pretending that this is a scholarly work. Unfortunately, there are historians out there who know better and who are willing to reverse what they've said before and to support what is being said here. And this book, there has been a campaign before it even came out. This is, I think she was posting this on Twitter, encouraging her hundreds of thousands of followers to buy books and donate them to schools and to libraries. And so even in states where the teaching of the 1619 Project is outlawed, the students could be getting this book, and they want them to have the book. So anyway, I've written 2 books. I started with Howard Zinn and debunking the 1619 Project. So, I provide the evidence to refute the claims that are made in both books. I fill in the gaps. I use legitimate scholarly sources. I've had some really good help at the Alexander Hamilton Institute, from the president there, who is a history professor, and a number of colleagues who have checked out my book. So we've also got critical race theory in schools. And so what we're doing is we've got the laws against 1619 Project and laws against critical race theory. And I'm going to make the connection between Common Core. I know a few of you know, when I was living in Georgia 10 years ago, Jane and Kathy know this, we were fighting Common Core, and I see the connection between Common Core and the acceptance of these obviously bogus histories. When the 1619 Project arrived and people learned that it was in schools, and they learned that 1776 was, being struck out, and this is what kids were taught, and that critical race theory was being taught, and that students were being divided into groups by their skin tone, and they were taught that, all the white students were oppressors, and students of color were oppressed. People got outraged, but it's like boiling the frog. This has been coming for a long time. The communists started over 100 years ago. They've had, their dupes, the teachers who think they're doing a good thing, promoting their ideas sometimes without noticing it. And I think more recently, 10 years ago, it began or was ushered in with Common Core. Just to review, Common Core was an initiative that was started under the Obama administration. They were called the Common Core State Standards. They were not state standards, they were federal standards. They were imposed on states with the bribe of federal money during the recession of 2009. States accepted these standards sight unseen. and implemented them. And, to my dismay, the first time I really got involved in politics, I found myself, someone who had been teaching college English for 20 years, trying to educate these political leaders and bureaucrats about what the state standards in English language arts were really like. I was ignored and dismissed, given a very limited amount of time. But nonetheless, I think we're seeing the effects of this and the acceptance of something as ludicrous as the 1619 Project. So I'll talk about the Common Core state standards in English language arts. That's my field, not the math standards. The math standards were crazy as well. Some of you may remember how, simple division, long division was no longer, the columns of words in the line and, or, the multiplication. It was these huge graphs and charts and drawings and diagrams. But the English language arts standards were really bad. And I think they went beyond just simply harming English courses, but they also had an effect on our understanding of history. What Common Core did, it confused teachers, English teachers who were used to teaching what English teachers teach, which is fiction, drama, and poetry. And it asked them to teach historical and nonfiction documents in their classes. So, for example, they were asked to teach the Gettysburg Address cold, no context, and just give it to the students and let them, struggle with it in their little groups. It gave them documents from like the Federal Reserve or OSHA standards, all this ridiculous stuff. And it kind of reminded me of when I was in graduate school. We would read these theories, these theorists, and someone named Stanley Fish, who was a proponent of reader response. We were asked to read him, and the professor, sort of opened the discussion of Stanley Fish, posed the same kind of question Stanley Fish would pose, and asked us, well, why do we value Shakespeare more than, say, the directions on a box of pancake mix? And you're just sort of sitting there and, there are eternal truths. There is the study of mankind. There is the study of human nature. There's the language, the poetry. But that's what Common Core does too. That's what it did. And it's still in place under different names in various states. And so everything was lumped together as information. Shakespeare's information, Federal Reserve documents are information. It's all information. It gave students short pre-selected passages. So students did not sit down and read an entire work. So they were given snippets. And of course, these passages were carefully selected by teachers or educators or curriculum writers. And if you read part of a document, you may not get the full scope of it. There was group reading. So people who were struggling with the, with the reading, who were behind, could keep up. So you didn't want to have any students excelling others. There was a lot of discussion. The evaluation, the grading was very subjective. It was no longer based on what students knew. Did they know dates? Did they know about certain people in history? Did they have skills in math or writing? But rather it was based on such subjective criteria as, do you accept diversity when we have group discussions? Emotions replaced facts and logic. And the emphasis was on collaboration, creativity, deep learning, instead of independent thinking. And when I've given my presentation, I thought back on what I was, fighting against in Common Core, because a couple years ago, I was giving a presentation at a university. And I had some of the students were, kind of hostile to me because I had said, they were like this, because I had said something negative about Black Lives Matter. And, we had just had the summer of violence, of the statues coming down and, people being killed and property damaged. And so some of them were hostile. And the professor said, that was probably not, they don't like that. But there was this one guy in the back of the class, and he raised his hand, and he was sincere, he was polite. And I had gone through the spiel and said, this is what Howard Zinn got, presented the wrong way deliberately. He left out words from this quotation from Columbus's journal. I gave examples of how he did that, how he spread those falsehoods. And the student in the back asked me, well, we know this, but why do you still want to keep it out of the classroom? Why don't you want it taught? And I thought, well, because it's not true. And he couldn't understand that. And then it dawned on me that what has happened is that through educational initiatives like Common Core, we have lost the ability to distinguish between fiction and nonfiction, right? It's all information. And, I remember from probably third grade, learning what the distinction was between fiction and nonfiction. Nonfiction is based on facts. Fiction is something that's made up, that's creative. It has its value, but I knew the difference. And this young person did not know or did not understand why one should not be taught as history versus, another. And recall that the magazine had 17 literary works. So that's teaching history. And it's the same thing, only, bigger in the book. And furthermore, people don't care whether something is true or not. So I think that led the way for the 1619 project. And it diminished history, and it also diminished literature, because we no longer think of literature as something that is a part of our heritage, that speaks to eternal truth, that has aesthetic value, that ennobles us, that makes our lives better. So we've got this denigration of both literature and history. I also spoke at another group about the 1619 project, and this was a group of parents and community members in Maryland, and I talked about this children's book, which was also published in conjunction with this big book, and this is intended for K through 8th grade, which tells you how far our reading standards have devolved. And it's full of, K through 8, and it's full of scenes of blissful life in Africa, just so happy. And then it's dark when the white people come and kidnap mommies and daddies. So that's what's being read to kindergartners. Well, white people did not kidnap mommies and daddies. And she knows it's false, but it's promoted. And so I have this woman say, well, why do you think that it should not be read to small children? So because it's wrong, it's false. And it's like making me scratch my head, how did we get to this point where we don't value truth or independent thinking or logic or respect evidence? And I think that is part of the big challenge. We have to reestablish the value of both history and literature. So why was Common Core implemented? What were the goals? Well, you want equity instead of equality of opportunity. So Common Core leveled everything. The group discussions were intended to bring along the lagging readers so they could get the material that they could not read on their own. It was for the elimination of achievement gaps. You don't want any gaps between any groups. And, usually they're, if it's a group gap, it's usually based on race or ethnicity. There's federal money. And, I think, one of the funders of it, Bill Gates, wanted these automatons sitting at computers, incapable of independent thought and just being great worker bees. So here we have, I think, the effects of Common Core are the elimination between this distinction between fiction and nonfiction. And just to review, we basically have a citizenry that doesn't think that it's important to have factual history. Another thing, a final thing from the Obama administration was the change in the AP standards, the advanced placement standards, and advanced placement courses are for students who are advanced. They get college credit. And the importance of the AP standards is that they trickle down to the regular history courses. So what happens in AP happens in the rest of history. These were revised under the Obama administration. They were revised by David Coleman, who became the new leader of the College Board, which creates the AP standards. He had created, he was the architect of Common Core, and the new history standards were skewed so far to the left that often the teacher education programs used Howard Zinn's history book, because if you knew Howard Zinn's history, you could ace the new AP exam. So they also replaced the emphasis on understanding, the facts, the chronology, the context, real history, with historical thinking skills and critical thinking. So what we have is, we had, the high school English teachers teaching these historical documents, technical documents, in a course that was intended to teach the literary works. But now we have the 1619 project that's being taught in English courses. So this is from, this is a photo of a class, an English class at the University of Notre Dame. There's nothing really literary about the 1619 project. I think unless you look at it as a piece of propaganda. And I think it's useful to teach about propaganda when you're teaching rhetoric in English so that students can just tell what it is, right? But anyway, so we're doing at the college level what Common Core was doing, is merging these two disciplines and helping to further eliminate this distinction between fiction and nonfiction. Okay, so what we have is, history has become not something that can be proven through the evidence, through a consensus of expert opinion, but through competing narratives. And it depends on who is telling the story, who's telling the narrative. That's what the acceptance is based on. So if you are a member of a particular group, of an oppressed group, or one that's been deemed oppressed, your narrative is more legitimate than another. The narrative allows for the policy. That's a quotation from Nicole Hannah-Jones when she was getting an award from, actually it's a Freedom of Speech Award. Yeah. Freedom of speech. This is your senator. I hate to say this. They were both getting awards for two of the four freedoms that that were invented by Franklin Roosevelt. Two of those were invented for freedoms. So what is the policy? The policy, it's a political policy, so there's a political objective. History should not have a political objective. History should be neutral. The policy objective, and she has come out and said this, and actually the last of the 18 essays in here, which is written by Nicole Hannah-Jones, and she's also written the first one. But the last essay, number 18, is an argument for reparations. So she basically says, well, now that you've read the 500 pages of this book, you understand why we need reparations. Okay, so at the same time, we have critical race theory. And the similarity, again, between critical race theory and Common Core is the emphasis on the narrative, the storytelling, the elimination of the distinction between fiction and nonfiction. Everything's just a story. That's the way it is under critical race theory. And if you recall, Howard Zinn wrote that essay in honor of Herbert Marcuse, one of the prime proponents of critical race theory. Here are the names of some others, probably familiar to you if you're keeping up with the current controversies about teaching this in the schools. It's critical theory. There are various spin-offs. There's critical legal theory. There's critical, I learned last night, critical education theory. There's critical race theory, and critical race theory is the one that's being taught in the schools, although often it's denied. So what do all these critical theories do? They submit all previous norms, traditions, and institutions to relentless criticism. I remember this from learning about deconstruction in graduate school in the 90s. You just sort of attack every aspect of an institution of the church, the legal system, the form of government, until it's demolished. So there's constant disparagement to weaken the foundations of society and replace them. And then there's the denial of the existence of metaphysical or transcendent truth. And those of us who believe in truth, we know that as human beings, we never access the full truth. We see through a glass darkly. There is one source of truth. We try, as best we can to determine the truth, but we believe in a truth. Critical theorists don't believe there is any truth. Everything is relative. And so all you have are these narratives, competing narratives, and whoever is the most powerful, their narrative is going to win out. So how much more time? Yes.
Behind critical legal theory is
Yeah.
Data, numbers don't lie. Men and women lie. Numbers don't. So the data suggests one thing. And see, without critical legal theory, you would have no critical race theory.
Yeah. I think we're going to have a questions period, right? And how much more time do I have? Okay, great. All right. Yeah. So I'll try to wrap it up. That's a great question. Okay. So that's what it results in. So the 1619 Project is history told through the lens of critical race theory. It's you know, it's a narrative. There is no truth. It treats individuals as groups. All white people are the same. All Black people are the same. You know, so it presents groups as either oppressors or oppressed. And as a result, in the summer of 2020, after the death of George Floyd, there were protests, or more accurately, riots, and you know, ostensibly over the death of Floyd, but all these historical monuments and symbols of American history were attacked. Here's Christopher Columbus, and it was, you know, Confederates, Union soldiers. There was a prairie woman. There was an elk, a statue of an elk that was torn down. So these were all attacked, and I think it's because young people have been taught to hate the American heritage so much that they, you know, let out their rage on these symbols. To his credit, President Trump had the White House Conference on American History. I was there. I talked about Howard Zinn, and some people criticized him for waiting so long to do this, but he was alerted to critical race theory being taught in schools and used in employee training by Christopher Rufo. And, you know, and it's the way that these educrats work. I think sometimes they like it when there's a Republican administration, because people become kind of, they feel safe, but they're still doing their work. Okay, so these are the new books that have come out. More books are promised. These are published by Penguin Random House, the world's biggest publisher. The New York Times holds the copyright along with the individual authors. It's an enormous moneymaker. You know, the whole 1619 Project has been an enormous moneymaker for the New York Times. There are all kinds of, you know, there's all kinds of collaboration between profits and nonprofits. The New York Times, a for-profit company, is using educational nonprofits to promote its work and, you know, gain subscribers. But anyway, this is what's being pushed into the schools. People are volunteering to buy it. You know, before I was blocked on Nicole Hannah Jones's Twitter feed, people would send in photos of their children reading Born on the Water. You know, they would show teachers, you know, unwrapping the Amazon package for the 1619 Project. So anyway, my books are intended to be a weapon. Use them before the school board meetings to fight against this pernicious propaganda. I do believe that ultimately facts will win out. We have to keep insisting that there is a truth. We can't give in to their you know, message that there is no truth and that there are competing narratives. it's an uphill battle. And I would also like to mention that this book, which is published by a couple of professors, this is published by UGA Press. And it's intended for teachers, and it is a rationale for using a people's history of the United States. I communicated with one of the authors. He wrote one of the many negative articles about the White House conference and slammed me. And I wrote him a polite email. I said, you should know that I've written this book and I've discovered that Howard Zinn has violated all the rules of history writing. I have documentation. He plagiarized, so forth. He calls me an ideologue. I know he got my book. He never replied to me, but in this book, he calls me an, right wings, whatever. And he says there is no evidence of plagiarism. And I've got pages of plagiarism in my book. So if any of you have connections to the University of Georgia Press, this is supposed to be a scholarly book. It's published by a university press. It's supposed to be peer reviewed. That's how you get, scholarly books published. But it's spreading lies about Howard Zinn. It's presenting him as someone who should be taught in grades K through 12. So again, what I'm hoping to do with my books, with the, small publisher Regnery, is to get these works out there. I would like to be able to have them in libraries at least, or in schools, public libraries, school libraries. So students, if they're curious, can at least pick them up. And even if they're skeptical, look at the pages and see what I have. Know that there is an alternative out there, that there is evidence against, both of these pieces of anti-American propaganda, the 1619 Project and the People's History of the United States. There are brochures that are a parent's guide to how you can fight this. But both of these books are poisoning students. We saw the results of teaching this kind of history. It's not just that there are a lot of woke people out there, it's that these people are taking to the streets. And if you recall, in 2020, I was shocked. I'd never seen this before. I lived through the 1960s riots, and they were in a certain neighborhood. I lived in Rochester, New York, and I read about them later. But I don't think it came to the point where people sitting at an outdoor table had these mobs coming up to them, throwing over their tables, attacking them, people blocking streets, disrupting everyday life, attacking all symbols of our American past, even an elk someplace. So these histories really do have an impact. We will feel that we can't avoid it, even if our own children have been educated in a different way. There are people out there that have been indoctrinated with these books, and I just hope that my books can help in whatever way to stop that. So thank you. I think I've gone over time.
You want to take a couple of questions, then we'll move on to
Folks on Zoom.
Repeat
We
it.
do one or two ways. If you can repeat the question, or we can grab a mic.
Repeat it.
The folks on
Okay.
First question there.
Yes. Wonderful. Either the people practice is that there is no opposition. Critical theory is just all negative stuff. There never is systemic course and normal course at university. There's opposition. You look at both sides. Well, there's
So I guess the question is,
Yeah, that there is no opposition in critical theory. Most of the time when you study a subject, you look at things from all aspects. And I think that was part of the strategy, because if you oppose critical theory, then you are on the side of evil, right? So under critical race theory, if you question critical race theory, you are a racist, right? And so that was part of the strategy to silence any opposition or opposing views. And it's totalitarianism. It really is.
Dale, you have a question?
I would like to ask, explain or can you share with us, why do you think this book, despite was quite extensively discredited?
Yeah.
Why it's here?
Why our dead book was discredited? Why is it still used?
Why it's not only used, why it's becoming more and more popular? What is behind all of this 1619, CRT, and this book, and in general, what is the purpose of all of it?
Yeah,
Why the author?
right. So what is the purpose of these books? It's to start a revolution and to overthrow our system of government and to implement a Marxist one. Why are these books popular? Howard Zinn was a type of evil genius. He was a great propagandist. He uses a lot of tricks. I didn't have time to go into them. But what he does is he appeals to the pride of adolescence. He has, sort of why they read Catcher in the Rye. They want to seem smarter than the adults. He helps them feel that way. He asks leading questions, and he pretends, that they are the ones who have come to these conclusions. So, why are the adults saying this? They don't want you to know what I'm going to tell you. That's his strategy. That's how he hooks in a lot of young people. He also knocks down some of the best historians of American history, and he claims that they are racists and oppressors and so forth, and that they've hidden things. He's very dishonest about them. So he presents himself as the teller of truth. Bernard Bailiff, one of the best historians we've ever had, is knocked down by Howard Zinn. He makes emotional appeals. He claims to be standing up for the underdog. It's often called a bottom-up history. That's sort of their marketing line. All these people who have been neglected by other historians, Howard Zinn is going to tell their story. He doesn't tell their story. These are sort of anonymous entities who are spouting Marxist slogans, or they're very famous Marxist radicals. But he's pretending he's doing that. And so he is sort of the white knight that comes in and he is speaking for the oppressed. And that's all a lie. One of his biggest critics was actually an innovator when it came to writing histories about immigrants, the poor immigrants coming in. Oscar Handlin, the immigrants coming into Boston. There were others that were doing it. Howard Zinn pretends he's the one. He is doing something that's never been done. So if you're very naive and you're young, you are captivated by it.
Clever propagandists. Thank you. We're going to have to stop with that. We'll take more questions afterwards. Thank you very much. Yeah, there's a question back here about, I'm sorry, I don't think we have the time or the right people to answer the question about critical law theory. None of us are expert in that. Can we do that after the discussion, please? Go ahead. Sure.
Free market capitalism, then you got people over here that put the market And see, people like, they're using Marxism to attack little holes to be trying to take army.
Yeah.
With that being said, when you can look at things like critical legal theory and make a real case on the numbers don't lie, and that's how you can spin critical legal theory into critical race theory, with something that I denounce.
Yeah.
But critical legal theory is real.
Okay, thank you.
That's interesting, yeah.
Yeah. That's okay. That was my phone. How did my phone do that? I'm sorry. All right. Well, thank you very much. Now, one of the things that Jeffrey's been preaching and I've been saying and many others have been saying for many years is one of the really, really most important things we have to do in America is teach our kids how to identify propaganda, how to identify it. Very skillful propagandists. That's who we've been listening about all night, both of them. You just heard that. How do young people determine that? And especially how can they determine this is propaganda if they don't know what truth is? So truth, propaganda, that's a fundamental. So that's leading us into the next part of our evening. And so to hang with us, we have, I think, 3, 4 speakers actually coming up, but they're all going to be quick. So, but we're all on the same theme, really, of propaganda. How do we understand? How do we identify it? And how do you smell it? Some people are just smelling it. So let's hear about it. Jane Robbins, would you come up first and talk with us about a project that you're working on? And I guess we'll just get over here towards the mic and speak behind the podium. Is that better, Steve?
Okay.
You can hold it or don't hold your phone by it.
I don't have a phone.
That's fine, just right here. So
Okay.
first, Jane, tell us just a little bit about yourself, your background, your education,
Okay.
and how you came to do this, and then what you want to present.
Okay. My name is Jane Robbins. I live in Tucker. I have been working with Mary and other people for a long time on the whole Common Core thing. It started with that. And I'm retired now, but I get dragged back into some of this stuff because every time you think things are getting better, they're actually getting worse. But one thing that Bob wanted me to just mention to you is a project that I'm working on with some people in, they're actually in Washington, D.C., but don't hold that against them. One of them, he is our CEO of our company. His name is Ted Grabar, and he was with Mary on that, the White House Conference on American History. Our project is called American Achievement Testing. It's a new company, and the point of it is to create a traditional, good, true American history book, or curriculum. And the curriculum would be marketed to individual school districts all over the country, which we're going to have to flip some school districts, for example, in Gwinnett County. But it is in development right now. And as soon as we get some more money, we'll be able to release more and more components of it. It's going to start with U.S. history, then it will go into other things as well. This curriculum will be designed around a book, and I think Holly is handing out a document that will show you what the book is. The book is a textbook for high school U.S. history. It was written by Bill McClay, who is, at that time, he was a professor of U.S. history at University of Oklahoma. He has now moved to Hillsdale. But we had been talking to Bill a long time ago and said, what is the best history textbook out there? And he said, there isn't one. And so we said, you want to write one? And he said, well, let me think about it. And he did, and he wrote this book called Land of Hope. And it is a wonderful book. I think Bob's got a copy. Oh, right there, missed it. This is his book. It is a wonderful book. It is not a right-wing, whitewashed version of American history. It is true, and it is very well documented. He actually, if you're interested in knowing more about this book, which will become the textbook for our curriculum, you can go to Hillsdale Online because he has a free course there. It's a 24 episodes or something. And I listened to it just one a day, and it was really fascinating. I've learned a lot that I didn't know. And one thing that I would mention about our curriculum, which is coming up, and that well, before I leave the book, this is what you should be advocating for your schools. Make sure that this book is considered when they're looking at the textbooks, because the ones they're looking at now are horrible, are absolutely horrible, almost across the board. This is a good book, and it's very well reviewed. But Ted Grabar, who is the head of our group, and he and his wife are doing most of the work on the actual curriculum. Ted is Romanian originally. He's American now, but he came over. He lived under a communist system even longer than Mary did, because he was 5 when he came. But I keep noticing that people who escaped from communism tend to be very pro-America and very devoted to truth. And that's what Ted is, and he is fabulous, and we've got some really good people working on this project. So I hope that you will go to our website. I think the website is on the document, that you will take a look at this book and advocate for it. And we will, if you know any millionaires who want to write us a check, feel free, or we'll take smaller amounts as well. But we're hoping that this is something that is a kind of a light on the horizon, that we can do something good. We don't have to be captive to the people and their products that are destroying our schools and our country. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. We want to just continue on with this theme, I guess, for a minute, and we're going to, discovering truth and sort of understanding propaganda from firsthand. I'd like to introduce Hai Kao. Hai is a member of the executive board of the Gwinnett GOP. He is actually running as a state representative to the Georgia state legislature. He's one guy who stepped up and said, hey, I see all this corruption going on out there, and I want to do something about it. So, Hai, tell us how you came to be an American and what you see about America that worries you right now. Come on around this way so we don't get this feedback. There you go, brother.
Thank you, Bob. Again, my name is Hai Kao. I'm Hai Kao. I came here in 1975, April 30th. I escaped from communism. And like Bob said, I volunteered when I saw all that George Floyd and racism, and started with Barack Hussein Obama back in 2009. The first incident is when he cited that the Harvard police officer arrested a black professor that's racist. Everybody remember that, right? It turned out it was not. It was the professor who said it was not. But yet, Obama decided all that. And if you remember the next 8 years of his administration, it's just one incident after another about black against a white cop and all that. Now, I raised that so that I can bring it back earlier. There was the question about critical theory, why nobody oppose it. I grew up in a country that was inflicted with all communism and all of the propaganda. And I'm telling you, critical theory was from Karl Marx, right? It started with Lenin's, and he applied exactly good like that. Yes. Yeah, but then I move on to like when China became communist country, and Mao Zedong used a critical theory, because critical theory is divide to conquer. In order for them to control the country, they had to have one class against another. And that was when Mao Zedong has to start a cultural revolution. All of a sudden, if you are educated, if you like documentary, you are a criminal. Boom, you gone. Put them on in prison, gone. Lo and behold, if you remember, some of you remember that the Vietnam in 1954 was divided. The Northern Vietnam became a communist Vietnam. And guess what Ho Chi Minh did? Again, critical theory. What he did was the poor versus the rich. All of a sudden, you rich people, now you're a criminal. So when Barack Hussein Obama, under the instruction of Jeff Soros, say, well, you got to turn this country to a communist country. Remember when Barack Hussein Obama, when he campaigned, what he said? Transform the country. Transform the country. And then what he said? Thank you. And then what he said, hope and change. Why the hell you hope? You do something, just hope. If you're a leader, you get to do something. Why hoping? But he just like talking sweet. But one thing he did very good, I give to him big credit. He told Soros that, critical theory is not going to work here. Because, rich and poor and educated, uneducated, it won't work. Race, critical race theory, black versus white. Oh my God, he was successful. What a guy. So I'm here to tell you that I am a living truth. I'm not exaggerating. I can smell communism far away. And right now, if you look at this, if you don't see it, then you don't get it. But if you watch it, all right, look at Barack Hussein Obama pulled the puppet Biden. He say, just keep on COVID-19, that China virus. We want to control people. Just yesterday, that Fauci said, watch out, guys. We're about to have another million. We need to lock down again. Communists, once they test the power that control people, they just can't let go. They have to grab it. So why the hell did he cause inflation? The country was good. The economy was good. You had to control. People had to be controlled. So all I'm telling you is, I am here living. If you ask me any other question, I can tell you. I mean, the atrocity, the tyranny of the Vietnamese Communist Party until this day. On May 11 of 2022, when I and a group of my people have a meeting in Washington, D.C., just to tell the Democrat Anthony Blinken how bad that is in communist Vietnam right now. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, next we have Simon Su, President and CEO of Lydia Design Studios. And Simon, come on up and share your story. Simon is going to talk to us about North Korea. You don't hear much about this, and we're live on Zoom, so be careful what you say.
It is my honor to be here, standing before you. I love my and our country, USA. Right after I graduated from high school in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, I joined the United States Army, and served Uncle Sam in the United States Army Reserve. Year 2006 to year 2016, a little over 10 years, I was working for an international NGO, and my job was to rescue North Koreans. Those 10 years, I've been rescuing about 300 North Koreans. Now, many of you really don't know what is going on behind those Kim Jong-un and what is really happening in North Korea. 1994 to 1998, there was a huge famine in North Korea. Now, historians now refer that as the March of Suffering. In those starvation time, the United Nations estimated 3 million people, North Koreans, died of starvation. We never heard about that. So because of those tremendous famine, North Koreans were fleeing from their country to China. But communist China would not recognize those North Koreans as refugees. So when they hunt them down, North Koreans, they send back to North Korea, where they're gonna be severely punished. Now, Korean War ended in 1953, and South Korea, they decided to be a democracy. But North Korea, of course, they wanted to be a socialistic communist country. 1953, South Korea was one of the poorest countries in the world. But because they were a democracy and free marketing, now South Korea is the 10th wealthiest country in the world. 1953, North Korea was richer than South Korea. But now they are one of the poorest countries in the world. I believe it is because they were facing communism there. Now, we must understand that those North Koreans, when they come to South Korea, they risk their lives to escape from North Korea to come to South Korea. And one major reason they are coming out of that is because they want freedom. Now, I was not interested in politics in USA because I was a pastor. So I was just involved in ministry only. But I realized that, oh my gosh, our country is facing critical time right now. Because, kids, they can go to school and they can say, I'm a gay, but they're okay. But if they say I'm a Christian, something is not right. They have a very uncomfortable way of expressing themselves. And that is the critical time that our freedom is jeopardized. So every time I go to Washington, D.C., Korean War Memorial, there's one statement it says, freedom is not free. So we have to fight. We have to stand for freedom in the United States. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. Okay, we're down to our final guest speaker of the evening, and this is Mikhail Needleman. Come on up. Michael, Mike, whatever. Come on up. I'll let Mikhail tell his own story, and we're going to wrap up after that. But the whole point of this evening really is this story and what we're going to ask you to do after it. So stay tuned.
Well, hello, everybody. Hello. First, let me thank you for the opportunity to share with you my thoughts, concerns, and ideas about our public schools education. Also, I would like to appreciate the Gwinnett Republican Party and Specialty Bob Christensen and Sammy Baker for their support and the opportunity to present to you my story of what I believe we need to do and why to stop socialist, communist, and progressive indoctrination of our children, our future voters, and leaders. So here are my thoughts, concerns, and ideas. As conservatives, we are often frustrated when Republicans won't unify over a critical issue. Democrats, however, typically show up in lockstep. There are many wise reasons for our representatives, or any of us, not to fall in lockstep. We're a nation of independent thinkers. We have varying perspectives and priorities. Likewise, we encourage debate, not censorship. Still, one issue we can all get behind in election integrity. The United States becomes a banana republic without free and honest elections rather than constitutional republic. Let's take this notion a step further. What happens to our constitutional republic if elections are clean, yes, yet most voters are misinformed? In the words of Thomas Jefferson, the best defense of democracy is an informed electorate. Today, in schools across our great state and country, students are being lied and brainwashed about socialism and communism. They are not learning history. They don't even know the truth about our founding fathers or the fundamentals of our US Constitution. What happens then when they reach voting age? As a political refugee who in 1978 escaped from former Soviet Union to become a constitutional loving US citizen, I intimately familiar with propaganda machines that distorts facts to create naive believers in socialism and communism. And I would like to illustrate the power of unchallenged propaganda. I would like to share with you the following. When in school in USSR, I thought how tremendously lucky I was to be born in the Soviet Union. I was convinced no other government granted greater justice or equality to its people. The Soviet way of life is the best in the world. That was our mantra. At the same time, Soviet propaganda extensively lied about the United States and other democratic societies, which were portrayed in a tremendously negative light. Their distortions covered all spheres of our life: political, business, personal, social, and religious. All capitalists, for instance, were ruthless wolves. The Soviets even adopted a famous Latin proverb, homo homini lupus est, which means a man is a wolf to another man. This is how they describe the life in our society. Anticipating the wars, I was worried about encountering such insensitive people. Once I arrived in the US, I was shocked to experience just the opposite. Americans were exceedingly generous and kind. I don't remember any classmate, teacher, school administrator, friend, or family member who openly expressed other sentiments and beliefs. We all talked that it would be a great honor, if necessary, to fight and die defending our Soviet motherland and way of life. After spending 2 years as a conscript in the Soviet army and entering civilian life, I had personal experiences to make me aware of the destructive reality of socialism and communism. Soviet equality is nothing but equality in misery. I'm grateful for my family and close friends who, in secrecy, entrusted me with their opposing views that fostered discernment in my adulthood. You can imagine, therefore, why it is so sad and troubling for me to witness how the progressive Democrats, in their criticism of our society, not only adopted Soviet and now Russian and Chinese lies, criticism, and information and misinformation about our history and culture, but have also managed to infiltrate our educational system with such lies. Considering the pro-socialist, anti-constitutional environment in America's classrooms, we must form a cohesive strategy to challenge, expose, and discredit the progressive, that means socialist and communist propaganda. We can do this by restoring fact-based history and social studies curricula with an appreciation for our constitutional freedoms. The goal is not to silence those with opposing views. That's their tactic. Our approach is to present simple truths that demonstrate why our democratic republic offers the most promising path to freedom and prosperity. As we work to restore election integrity, we must also free the hearts and minds of our children who have been held captive to propaganda in our nation's classrooms. Our window of opportunity, however, is narrow. From meeting conservative politicians and candidates, I hear they can only carry so many torches. When I raise my educational concerns, some of them shrug, saying it is what it is. Nothing will change if we wait around for them to do the groundwork. This is our assignment. Like many other initiatives affecting change, I believe parents and other like-minded citizens will fuel this effort. At the same time, this is also a battle that requires a united front. Here, we must be in lockstep as we mobilize against progressive propaganda in our schools. This is not the time to form committees and talk about what we might do or what to do. I have created some fundamental issues to address in what I have named the emotional appeal versus destructive reality of socialism and communism. It is an idea, a start. How many of you, please raise your hands, agree that this is a dire problem that we must address immediately? Very good. Thank you. Please sign out and join us. We need both. We need boots on the ground, ideas, support, and accountable, action-driven strategy to tackle the critical issues of educating our developing voters and citizens. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
So we're passing around a couple of sheets here, and I'm sorry I don't have a pen to start it. Somebody have a couple of pens to there. Okay. But anyways, just a sign up sheet for you to, if you'd like to join Mikhail and us in this team. Basically, all we're going to do is send you the Mikhail's document that he's referenced, which is outlining essentially the need and a strategy. We want to identify, so the goal is to help free our children from Marxist propaganda that they're getting through the schools and through the media and through social media. So how do we do that? So there's many ways to do that, obviously, and there's many things that we need to look at. We need to understand, find some great curriculum and introduce it in our schools. So just videos, books, stories. There's some really great ones we've seen already, but let's put an annotated bibliography of the history, the real history of communism, and get it to parents and teachers. I mean, that's simple. We can do that. AKS. Let's look at AKS in the state of Georgia. What is the actual content that's being taught in our schools in Georgia about communism and socialism? Click, examine it. People to do that. So if you're interested in getting active, doing a little work, a little research, helping a team find ways to do that, maybe putting together a website, certainly a group of people on email chains, just sign up and help Mikhail get this going. Okay. Thank you, Mikhail, and thank you everybody for coming. Over here on your way out. Get a monograph. Yeah, thanks for coming.